200 times. Boy, you folks out there are lucky. Buckeyes Live for a 200th edition here on a Wednesday. Welcome in, everyone. Leave those comments and questions in the live chat, and we will get to them, especially today, folks. We will get to them as certainly looking for topics concerning Ohio State football. So anything you've got, you ultimately produce the show, folks. We've got Kevin Noon, of course, from Buckeye Huddle, and also the Big Me podcast right next to me. Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts 247 Sports. Guys, how we doing today?
Doing well.
Doing great.
The weather hasn't been that bad for an entire winter. You know, it's mid-February and pretty bearable out there. So we've had kind of a light touch for most of this winter, but of course it's probably not over. Maybe another blast or two. All right, Steve, I'm going to serve this one up to both of you. I guess I'll start with you, Steve. The S&P rankings came out. I haven't done a deep dive into anybody else, but in looking at the Bill Connolly metrics that involve, returning production, in which Ohio State's 97th in the nation in returning production. Michigan's in the top 5 in returning production. Different people have different slants on that. The other would be that there's a heavy weight placed on not just this recruiting class that's coming in this particular season, but how well the school's recruited, and kind of a recency bias, I guess you could say, just based on, does this program, does it hit the mark? Is it showing and proving that it's always going to be a contender? And of course, with Ohio State, that's a definite yes. And despite the loss at quarterback, the number 1 offense ranking in the country, Steve.
Wow, that's interesting. I think they're assuming, obviously, that there's going to be a quarterback selected who can continue the outstanding play that Ohio State's had, and their offensive line is going to hold up. I think that's a big part of the issue for this team as well, as I look at it. So those are two huge aspects, obviously, but you can't look past the fact that you've got really good running backs, provided they can stay healthy. And you've got the best array of wide receivers of any team in the country. I think somebody, I don't know where or what team it is, but somebody somewhere may have put out a claim that somebody has the number 1 group of wide receivers, and it wasn't Ohio State. I saw that on our message board that somebody raised it, but I didn't get a chance to click on it to see who they were looking at. But to have Harrison and Abuka and not be number 1, and then throw in Fleming and whoever else, I don't know how that would work. But to me, what this team and this program has proven is they're not going to slip up. They're not going to lose to one of the, quote, lesser teams on their schedule, and they're vulnerable when they get into like versus like, obviously, against Michigan, against the likes of Georgia in the playoffs. So they're going to get there. That's what we seem to know. So it's winning those big games when they get there. That's the big thing for them. I think their defense will be improved. So I don't have an issue with it. 2, 3, 4, whatever you want to put them. Again, it's all just fun stuff to talk about, but there's a lot of guys on this Ohio State team that are playing for great NFL draft stock for 2024, and they all need to have a great year to be selected in the first, second, third round, whatever their ceiling is, and there's a bunch of them. So I think that bodes well for Ohio State.
Yeah, there are a lot of metrics that are out there that I don't pay attention to. SP Plus is one that I do. Is our new puppy barks in the background. That's why I'm not up in my office. I'm down here playing babysitter to make sure that the puppy doesn't mess up the house too much. But back to the point, SP Plus is one of the metrics that I think that does a good job of predicting and breaking things down. And I haven't had a chance to look at the numbers to kind of see where some of the other like teams are and how that's broken down. But this Ohio State team, despite what a lot of fans may be saying, that this is a team that's poised to be a 10-2 team, maybe even a 9-3 team, I don't think they realize exactly what's coming back. And more importantly than that, they may be focused on what is gone from Ohio State, but they don't realize that everybody else deals with the same situation. It's not like Ohio State in losing C.J. Stroud and 3 offensive linemen and Zach Harrison, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is unique in that type of situation. Alabama's got big losses, losing Bryce Young, among others. Georgia losing Stetson Bennett, losing the Jalen Carter, losing Nolan Smith. Everybody's going to go through some of those situations. So SP Plus makes me feel like it's something that is a little bit more widely accepted as this is the criminal right here that I'm watching right now as she walks up to me.
Well, she's a cutie.
Yeah, it's there's a lot to unpack there, but I'm excited, and the best part about it is it means that we're talking about football and not the XFL necessarily, which starts this weekend. And I think this is version 3.0 for the XFL.
Oof.
Yeah, no thanks on that. And
thanks.
I've often been baited into the alternate football seasons going way back to the USFL, but not anymore.
Nope.
Not anymore. We got the 10th ranked defense according to S&P Plus as well. So that's a big wild card in all of this, of course. And to Kevin's point, look across the nation, just about everybody loses. Just about everybody that's an elite program loses the starting quarterback, aside from Michigan. Pretty much everybody in the Pac-12. The Pac-12's got a lot of good quarterbacks coming back to their programs, but I don't know if those rosters are ready to compete for a national championship per se. All right, folks, leave those comments and questions in the live chat, Talking Buckeyes, as we do here each and every Wednesday. Appreciate Eric, Sue, and others. The Rod Farva's here as well. Missing in action and reminding Steve that pitchers and catchers report very soon.
Yep, we're ready. I think they're already starting to trickle in at Reds camp. Somebody sent me a screenshot, of the Reds mascot, and underneath it said eliminated. That's a little cruel on February 14th to get a screenshot that says your team's already been eliminated. But that so be it. That's life as a Reds fan. So there you go.
That's cute that the Reds are still trying to compete. Maybe one of these days they'll put a team together.
Yeah, I long for the day that the Major League Baseball returns to Cincinnati, Ohio.
Yeah, I just kind of can't get used to the Reds being this awful for this long, because they weren't for most of my, big baseball days from the time I was 7, 8 years old all the way up. Even when they were bad, they were entertaining, or even though they were marginal, maybe during the Griffey, Adam Dunn, Austin Kearns years, they were fun to watch because they get hit the ball out of the park and create offense.
They'll have pitching. They'll have pitching this year with Lodolo, Ashcraft, and Green. Although one of my buddies who covers Ohio State baseball pretty closely said that his people, he sees some scouts from time to time. He said those guys are burning to get out of Cincinnati where they can make the real money. But Ohio or Cincinnati still has control over them for the next 3 to 5 years. Whatever the deal is. So I don't know. Hopefully they can win a lot of games 2-1 this year. I don't know. They didn't really make any moves in the offseason to do much of anything. So it's probably going to be more of the same. The beatings will continue until morale improves, that type of thing. So it's going to be ugly, I think.
The Rod Farva letting us know that pitchers and catchers reported, at least somewhere, yesterday.
Yep.
So the Rod Farva, I'm out of the loop when it comes to that. About the biggest baseball fan that you could ever meet for about 40 years, but I've dropped completely off the map when it comes to that. The Rod Farva wants to know who's going to play left and right tackle.
Me too.
So does Justin Fry and Brian Hartline and Ryan Day. A lot of great candidates. I think you start with Josh Fryer. I think he'd be a guy that you'd have out there. Potentially Tegra Tashbola, if he has a great spring, could move his way into the 2 deep. He got a cup of coffee last year. Zen Michalski, I think, is in that group. There's 3 right there. They brought in Victor Cutler. He played tackle at Louisiana Monroe, maybe ticketed more as an inside guy at Ohio State, potentially the center. So we'll see how that shakes out. He's not 6'6". He's only about 6'3" or so, but he does have long arms. And he held his own against the likes of Alabama and some of the other top schools that they played. So there's 4 names right there. Kevin, who am I missing? Is there somebody else in your mind that might be in this mix?
Well, I mean, I think that it's going to be a lot of everybody try. I mean, they like to sit there and have guys learn multiple positions. So you're going to see a lot of moving around and whatnot. This, as the inside joke goes, I mean, we've got centers and non-centers. I mean, it's not quite to that point with Ohio State, but you mentioned Vic Cutler, who I think we all think will probably play center, but Carson Hensman is somebody that has looked good as he tries to learn the position. There's some guys that are, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of moving around in terms of what's going on. The only 2 positions I feel like I know what it's probably going to be is Matt Jones at one guard and Donovan Jackson at the other guard. And then everything else, if you're in the room, you better be ready to get up there and compete for the positions. I mean, I really do like Josh Fryer, maybe locking down one of those spots, and then Zen Michalski, Tegra Shabola. Some of those guys are going to be very much in the mix, but let's also remember there's another portal period coming up. And if Ohio State comes out of spring practice and is unhappy with what it has there, Ohio State absolutely will have to go and look and maybe try and bring in another body, with the issue being you don't get to really do anything until whatever summer workouts are and leading into fall. But, to the point that Rod Farva made, it's still very much a work in progress. This is not a case of, we all kind of know what's going to happen. This is one of those position battles where I don't think anybody, Ryan Day included, knows what's going to shake out of it.
Don't know if you guys have tracked the situation with Notre Dame pursuing or not pursuing offensive coordinators. The latest, Andy Ludwig from Utah, and there is a situation in which Notre Dame fans are quite upset, because it appears as though Marcus Freeman certainly had tagged Ludwig as the guy, and Notre Dame looked ready to pay the buyout, didn't pay the buyout. Maybe we're looking to negotiate it down. The optics of the situation are basically that they were not willing to back their coach, pay the buyout, get the guy that he wanted. We're not willing to take the nth degree to win at all costs, and not even at all costs. So they pick up one of the best quarterbacks in the country in Sam Hartman. They're still looking for an offensive coordinator, of course, a Buckeyes opponent in week 4. But I don't know that they're going to suffer from the lack of a proven offensive coordinator when it's all said and done and they go out there and get somebody. But there's a lot of talk out there about just the optics of Notre Dame not being one of the elite because of these type situations in which they're not willing to go to the nth degree.
Ludwig wasn't their main choice, though, either. It was,
true.
I mean, before that, it was the guy at K-State. They wanted the K-State OC, and he turned them down. And for everyone that we may hear about, you wonder how many we don't hear about. So it's kind of turning into a situation of where they are, I mean, are they on their 3rd choice? Are they on their 6th choice? Are they on their 8th choice? A lot of people thumb their noses at Alabama when Alabama ends up with Tommy Rees as their OC and with their DC hire. So are we seeing it? Are we in an era now where it's a lot harder for these major programs? Why can't they lure coordinator hires at this point? What's going on in that situation? There's going to be some optics about how Notre Dame isn't, whether or not they're not committed or what it is. Notre Dame is still going to be Notre Dame at the end of the day, but they're not necessarily coming out of the salad days in terms of what their offense has been coming from Tommy Rees. And if they have to get to their 7th or 8th choice, they're going to have to convince a lot of people that that this guy, whoever it is they bring in, is worth his weight.
Yeah, that is very interesting that Notre Dame wouldn't agree to do that. I would think that they're probably, like a lot of athletic departments, still feeling the sting of what happened during the COVID year, and perhaps didn't want to spend that money. I mean, it's not a public school; it is a private school, so they kind of make their own rules and can do their own thing. And ethically, morally, this was just not a bridge that they wanted to cross. And I don't even view it as an ethically or a morally type thing. I mean, I don't even know what to say. I mean, it's a weird situation that you have this fan base that demands that you try and compete nationally. You haven't won anything in 30 some years of note. And, you have made the playoff a few times and been in the hunt. I think this is part and parcel of Marcus Freeman. This is one of the downfalls of hiring a guy who is a younger guy who may not be as connected, to the old boy network in terms of, oh yeah, that job comes open. I've got a list of 4 people I've worked with here that would, take it in a heartbeat, who are all competent people. He doesn't have that wealth. I mean, he's in his mid 30s, or late 30s or whatever he is. And so, he's still trying to build that Rolodex, that, and you'll have to look it up. Anybody who's under the age of 40, what a Rolodex is, but still trying to build up those contacts and have those type of people at his beck and call that can come and work with him and be. I mean, if you get a quarterback of that magnitude, I don't know why you wouldn't want to work with somebody like that. And the guy at Utah, he's kind of a prisoner of inertia here. I mean, he signed a contract to stay at Utah, and Utah's holding him to it. So they're not cutting him or Notre Dame a deal to let him out of it. So, bully for them, I suppose. But yeah, tough situation for Marcus, and they'll come up with something. I don't doubt that it'll all work out. Ree's leaving for Alabama was kind of as I think one of you guys said, it was kind of a head scratcher to begin with, but okay, whatever. Everybody wants stability in their program, a guy that you hire and who will flourish in the job for the next 5 years. And there's not a lot of that going on in college football right now.
Yeah, everybody wants to sit there and keep their staff together, but when your program is on the decline, generally, it's when nobody wants anybody off of your staff.
Yeah.
When you're doing a good job in your role, people are going to come knocking on the door and trying to and pilfer your guys. And I go back to some of the Jim Tressel staffs. I mean, I'm convinced that Jim Tressel was Herculean in some of his efforts because he had very little turnover in a lot of members of his staff. And maybe, reporting certainly was a little different back then. There wasn't a lot of self-reporting. There wasn't a lot of citizen journalism out there on social media and just things kind of ending up out there. But you sat there and you saw Jim Tressel do it with the same cast of characters around him all this time. And it wasn't as if Ohio State didn't have success. Ohio State had a ton of success, yet was able to maintain its staff during that time. I'm just convinced that Jim Tressel probably did everything short of driving the team bus on that team.
Sue, we appreciate you being here. Sue has taken the way too early prediction category to a whole new level about the chances of winning against Michigan. I'll frame it this way. We, of course, are looking at 11 games between now and then and a whole offseason still to go. So there's a lot of speculation to throw into a prediction against Michigan on the last weekend of November. However, if things play out the way a lot of people believe, and Michigan is, through the course of 11 games, say the standard in the Big Ten, and Ohio State's really good, but Maybe they drop one to Notre Dame. Maybe they drop one to Penn State, and they're a clear underdog in that game. Take 2011 out of the equation, where Ohio State's just trying to beat their rival on a given day and salvage a season. Does this suddenly flip in regards to Ohio State being more carefree, less feeling pressure, being maybe circa 2004, where let's just let it go and we can play with more reckless abandon per se?
How do you go into that game with reckless abandon? That's just something that I just don't see happening that often, just with the pressure that's on there. Plus, Ohio State being on a 2-game losing streak and everybody, having their heads fall off right now over, Ohio State's inability to win the Big Ten, get to Indianapolis, et cetera, et cetera. I don't see any scenario where Ohio State goes in there and plays with reckless abandon. I'd like to see a situation where Ohio State goes in there and plays with 90% of its roster. That would be nice. I mean, but we know that when you're the 12th game of the regular season, the regular season finale, guys aren't going to be healthy. Ohio State dealt with it. Michigan dealt with it. Really didn't have Blake Corum last year. But, I think that all things being equal going into that game, if both teams are playing with a Big Ten championship on the line, with it being in Ann Arbor and it being a case of, if it's 11-0 and 11-0, at this point, I mean, without seeing the results of a season, do you have Michigan as a 1.5-point favorite or something in that game? That doesn't necessarily. I mean, that's kind of a neutral field pick 'em at that point. But do you give them a couple of points for being on home field? But to Suzabo's, the root of her question or whatever, I think Ohio State is fully capable of winning the game. Thought Ohio State was fully capable of winning the game last year. I mean, there's so many unknowns at this point. We don't know who the quarterbacks were going to be. Is Ohio State going to be able to run the ball? Are they going to have a little bit more of a matching offense in terms of rush and pass? I mean, are they going to be giving up the explosive plays? Yes, I think Ohio State absolutely can win the game, but until we get more data points at this point, we're really just we're picking 2025 Powerball numbers at this point. I mean, I think we're just throwing what up against the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah, I agree. I think certainly it's a long way off in the distance, and we don't know what injuries are going to impact these teams. Blake Corum coming back to Michigan is huge, obviously, for them, but a lot of top talent is back at Ohio State as well. So, I guess just you'll have to get to November and see how they match up. I mean, that's the only thing you can do. If you go into it down a couple of key players, then you're going to have a tough time going in there and pulling out a win. You need all hands on deck to win that game, and it wasn't like that, obviously, this past year with the way it all went down. So I don't know. They lose the third one in a row. That would be kind of tough, but it's not like Michigan's recruiting the rings around Ohio State anyway, despite of that. So Ohio State's gotta develop their players and the quarterback position most especially, and put the best player in the Big Ten out there on the field at each position and let the chips fall where they may. But Michigan playing the game at home certainly factors well for them. Ohio State didn't handle it very well up there 2 years ago. And part of it was the weather, but I think part of it was they just assumed they were going to walk in there, as they always have, and beat Michigan and come out of there with, going on to Indianapolis and so on. Well, the last 2 years, they haven't gotten the job done. And it's one thing to dwell on it and have it drive you. It's another thing to go out there and change it. And that's what Ohio State's got to do in 2023, is go out and change that narrative. And, I don't know about reckless abandon. I think you have to go into that game with some type of a controlled fury that you can execute your assignments. These games are more technical than they are acrimony, I think, at this point. I mean, the sophistication of the schemes both offensively and defensively. It's a cat and mouse game. It's a chess game, and whoever wins that chess game, is going to win the football game. It also helps when you have X's and O's like Hutchinson and Ojabo, like Michigan did, and Ohio State did encounter that 2 years ago when they played. But I think when you look at it deep down, I mean, these teams are very evenly matched. And again, let's get 10 or 11 games as a body of work to know what each of these teams is all about. And then we can make some more educated guesses, I guess, about what we might see on that Saturday in Ann Arbor.
But it is fun to talk about. It is fun to talk about this here in February. I mean, we're in the dog days, and I think that everybody wants to look at every hypothetical and every hypothetical matchup and every matchup that's on the schedule. And it's certainly with Ohio State being in this rare position of coming into the season on a 2-game losing streak, which is just really unheard of for recent memory. I think everybody kind of wants to know what it is, what's going to be around that that next corner. And honestly, for all of us, that's good because it gives us plenty to talk about. But at this point, I don't know how to predict what I'm expecting to see against Indiana in the season opener, let alone against Michigan in the season finale.
And I think a lot of people latch on to, obviously, when they compare two teams that are this close and they have strengths in different areas. Wow, one of these two teams lost its quarterback, and one of these two teams is going to be playing on the road. So that seems to shift and lean toward Michigan somewhat decidedly to a certain extent if you're going to make this simple analysis and not really review what's going on. And again, 11 games before then. Now, here's a stat that I track from year to year. I got into this habit about 5 years ago, and doesn't necessarily apply to Ohio State and Michigan, or if it does apply to one of them, then we've got a big story on our hands. So I would notice in the preseason publications, Street and Smith's, Athlon's, that they were very conservative with their predictions for records of teams. Just about everybody that was 8-4 last year, they had 8-4 this year, maybe 7-5, maybe 9-3. There was very little projection toward teams ascending or declining, in a substantial way. So I've looked at this for about 5 consecutive years. So take the 65 Power 5 teams from 2021 to 2022. And I just kind of drew the line at 3 games as being what I would consider to be a substantial difference in record. You go from 6-6 to 9-3, go from 7-5 to 4-8. That seems pretty substantial to me. This surprises everyone. How many teams out of the 65 Power 5 teams do you think had at least a 3-game difference in record from 2021 to 2022?
Out of 65, 3-game. I don't know.
Most people guess
I would say 8 or 9. Yeah,
27.
Wow, that's interesting.
27. So when you're making preseason predictions, and again, this doesn't necessarily affect Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, because it's 11-1 pretty much every year. These teams change pretty dramatically. 7 of the 10 Big 12 teams had a 3-game swing in their record. Yeah. Half of the ACC, I believe that the number was 5 in the Big 10 out of the 14. You've got your Michigan State at 5-7 after a 10-2, etc. Yeah. Illinois jumped.
I got to wonder too, with instant aid coming via way of the portal now or whatever, if we're going to see more dramatic jumps as teams are able to go out there and not have to rely on 17 and 18-year-old first-year players coming from the high school ranks and are able to go and get players with real college experience. And if we're talking, we're talking the 65 teams that are part of Power 5. You know, we're not looking at the rest of football. So generally you're going and getting guys that are supposed to be able to be instant impacts and be able to do some things. Are you going to have, with the plus minus of the portal, are you going to have wider swings from teams 20 to 65 because of the nature of the portal? I mean, it'll be interesting to kind of see how that trends out.
So what you just hit on there, Kevin, might be the reason why that number jumped to 27. So I was noticing Athlon, Street, and Smith, all of those, only about 3 or 4 teams would they project to take some kind of sudden leap or decline. And I was tracking this year to year as being in the 17 to 22 range, and then it jumped to 27 this past season. And you might have hit on exactly why. The portal.
It's always the portal. Damn you, portal.
Yeah.
Doggone that portal.
Yeah. That NIL is not far behind either. Peace Clan, does anyone think but me about our deficiencies in the cornerback room? Lots of issues there. In my humble opinion, for me, it's much more of a concern than offensive line or quarterback. No interceptions last season. Not good.
Well, I'm going to say Denzel Burke was a victim of the sophomore jinx, and that's why his season was kind of spotty. Plus, he was in and out of the lineup at times. Cam Brown's no longer there, so you don't have him to be as a whipping boy anymore. Jordan Hancock, theoretically, if he's healthy, should be in the mix, I think. And this Ole Miss transfer they're bringing in, Davison Benison, I think is how we pronounce it. He should be in the mix. So you've got 3 frontline guys right there, potentially. At least Burke and Igbenison have played at the Power 5 level. Hancock still trying to get his feet wet as an every down or a 40 play a game type guy. Kevin, beyond him, I mean, you lose J.K. Johnson to transfer. That kind of hurts the depth a little bit. They brought in some talented guys, but we just don't know. I think Jermaine Matthews from
Matthews, Calvin Simpson Hunt.
Yeah. They're freshmen, true freshmen, who are going to get a look. Are there any holdovers from last year's class?
Well, but remember too. I mean, you have Jair Brown had to start.
Yeah, and he got to play some.
I think there are two comments here in Peace Clan's question comment. I think there are 2 veins here that are not necessarily connected. I mean, they are, but they're not. I mean, I think that Ohio State's cornerback room, while still small, has a lot of experience because it had to. Ohio State only had 6 corners last year. Everybody but Ryan Turner really saw action. And they were kind of thrust out into the situation because of that. So you're bringing back a room that has a lot of experience, and you're bringing in some really talented true freshmen. And it's very easy to say, well, these true freshmen shouldn't factor into the depth immediately. But remember, Denzel Burke got right out there. Jair Brown got his number called last year due to the amount of injuries that Ohio State was dealing with. So I think that Ohio State, while the room isn't the deepest, I don't think year in and year out you're going to see the type of injuries that we saw in the Ohio State corner room. So I don't feel bad about that. Now, the separate issue is 0 interceptions. And, I don't want to try and quote Jim Knowles at this point, but if you get a team off the field in a 3 and out, that's as good as forcing a turnover. I mean, yeah, it's not a sudden change. You're going to lose a little field position when you punt, but I'm not as concerned about the 0 interceptions on face value. But I mean, you do want to see a situation where Ohio State was not 50-50 and 50-50 balls last year, 20-80. Ohio State has got to be better in 50-50 balls. And if some interceptions come because of that, that would be fantastic for Ohio State's in goal. But right now, I think that one of the things that's separating Ohio State from really emerging as a defense is being better with those 50-50 balls.
Yeah, you guys mentioned the true freshmen coming in. And when I look at the best recruits, at least on paper, and you see 3 of the top 5 are wide receivers, and you think, oh, okay, well, that's great, but is that really needed versus the other 2? Okay, Jermaine Matthews and Calvin Simpson Hunt as 2 of the most acclaimed of this 23 recruiting class. So they may get some run, as is stated here somewhere in the chat. Absolutely.
Well, and you don't know. The nice thing is Ohio State is going to have some time between game 1 and game 4 to try and figure out what it has. And while you're not necessarily looking to sit there and go to the lab for all 8 quarters of those 2 games, be it Western Kentucky and Youngstown State, you do need to sit there and try and figure out what the best 11 are to have out there, because the schedule is going to get real fast. And Ohio State has fewer home games this year. The crossover games are difficult. So the Buckeyes better figure out what's going on. I'm a big fan of both Matthews and Simpson Hunt. I don't know on the surface if these guys are going to be able to come in and surpass some of the guys that have experience, but you've got to open up the competition and kind of see what you have. But the biggest thing is, don't be throwing true freshmen out there because you have to, because you have too many injuries and you have to put them out there. If you put them out there because they've proven during practice, they've proven during everything that is your best option. And if that's the case, I'm all for it then.
Yeah, the comment there that Burke looked a little distracted, I would agree. I think that he just was kind of fighting some things. And obviously, when you change your position coach from one year to the next, there are some growing pains that go with that. I think Tim Walton took some heat for some of the techniques and some of the results. And, may or may not have been fair comment in his regard. I guess, the coaches are never going to throw the players under the bus and say, we've taught them to look back. They just don't look back. They're never going to say that. I guess there could be a coach that says, no, I'm happy that they don't look back. But that's a common message board refrain. Why don't our corners look back and make plays on the ball? And I'm right there with a lot of you in a lot of instances that, it would be nice if they did, but, they just really haven't. So, I'm of a belief that they're going to get it straightened out this year. I think it's all going to work out. They've got depth. As Kevin said, they've got guys who've played at least some. So I am of a mind that it's going to work out and they're going to get it. They're going to be better defensively, I think. Maybe that means instead of giving up 40 to Georgia, you only give up 25, or that caliber of opponent. 40 to Michigan, maybe you only give up 24, whatever that may look like. But I think it is going to be better on the bottom line, I think.
Garyon Conley, the former Ohio State defensive back, was on social yesterday, I think it was, and was talking about wanting to do a podcast about why corner is the most difficult position to play or whatever. I'm like, Garyon, come on over to the Big Me Kickoff. I got you here. We'll talk about it for 2 hours if that's what you want to. And it's animals just jumping all over this house right now. It's
any way you can get us viral, Kevin.
I guess
whatever it takes.
I guess. It's like Noah's damn ark around here or something. I don't know, but it's a difficult position for sure. Especially if Ohio State is going to put you out there on an island, and not everybody is built for that. But to Steve's point about getting your head around, I go back and forth on it. Yes, you would think that being able to track the ball by looking at it is very important. But there are also times where I don't care if you're looking back. If you're a step and a half behind the guy, you're not going to be able to do anything by turning your head. If you have perfect coverage and the ball is underthrown and the guy has to come back, the receiver comes back through you to try and get to it and draws a PI, I still don't know if in that bang-bang situation, if your head is turned around, if that's going to change a whole lot. But certainly there are refinements in the technique that are not necessarily connecting with these guys, whether or not it's them not, putting it as part of their game, or it's not something that is being talked about enough. I don't know on there, but there's a lot that still needs to be done in terms of getting the corners back to this BIA status that we saw, and I think a lot of Ohio State fans started to take for granted because it was year in and year out that they just had lockdown corners and guys that were going to go in the first round of the draft, and it dries up a little bit, and you kind of, I think at that point you realize how fortunate you were to have the Jeffrey Okudas of the world.
Yeah, they're just okay in America right now, Kev. They're not best in America, no doubt.
Not at the moment, no.
Not at the moment.
Yeah, I always thought quarterback was the most difficult position in sports just because those guys are having to make split-second decisions with all sorts of chaos going on around them and elite pass rushers coming after them and huge 300-pound monsters, shoving centers and guards in their face and then trying to anticipate, when I release the ball at this split second, because we always get that overhead view, especially during the NFL games, well, during the college games as well now, that I'm always fascinated at what point the ball is leaving the quarterback's hands. So he's already made a decision probably a half second before that, but when the ball's leaving his hands versus when it arrives and what he had to try to determine, unless the dude's wide open, in terms of anticipating windows and anticipating a lot, because the field looks and the coverage so much different 2.5 seconds later than it did at the point that he decided to make that throw. And then on the flip side, at least the quarterback's got control. He knows what the play is. He knows where the receivers are going to be and all that. The cornerback, these dudes just have nothing but green grass all over to cover this large land and face an elite athlete and not know where they're going to be and what they can do. And these quarterbacks and receivers are so good now. That is a tough deal for them. All right, folks, we're here every Wednesday with Kevin, Steve, and typically Tony talking Buckeyes football. We hope you appreciate that. We've done it 200 consecutive weeks. We would like to have a sponsor for this show. Please contact me at MarkRogersTV at Gmail. I can let you know exactly what the numbers are and how we can benefit you. And certainly appreciate Kevin and Steve here. And wink, wink, you know what that means. We've got a contribution avenue through Super Chat that you can take part in. Somebody had asked, Steve, you had a nice little soliloquy that I think was unintentional a few weeks ago, but you can speak directly to it. Kevin, you, of course, as well. Chuck is asking about, since we were talking the Michigan game, about the recruiting landscape changing rivalry games, the national approach.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, does this game mean as much as it could or it should to all these guys who are recruited from California and Florida? And a backbone of an Ohio State team should be Ohio guys. I mean, Ohio produces enough talent, and I think we're seeing with Ryan Day that they're trying really hard to add as much good Ohio talent as they possibly can. So. Are some guys slipping through the cracks here and there? Well, yeah, sure, but I don't think it's been anything that's been an epidemic or anything. But yeah, I think that it definitely helps. I mean, the better Ohio State teams, usually about half the guys are from Ohio in the starting lineup. So I'm not sure it's quite been like that in recent years. So yeah, I definitely see that as an impetus and a way to prioritize a rivalry game. In recent years, they've only been signing 6, 7, 8 Ohio guys. That's like 1/3 of your class. So just the raw numbers of that dictate that, 1/3 of your starters are going to be from Ohio if you only take 1/3 of your prospects from Ohio. So your hit rate on Ohio guys should be better just because they're going to stick it out maybe a little bit longer. I brought up J.K. Johnson a little bit earlier, a guy from out of state that just didn't see a future at Ohio State, but didn't want to stick it out to see if there would be a future. So, and not to pick on him because there's other guys that have taken that route, but it just shows you that sometimes the path of least resistance is what some of the out-of-state guys will look for, and that can kind of creep into your thinking there sometimes when it's cold and it's snowing and it ain't going real well, that maybe this isn't your day. But I don't like to say negative things about guys, or say that people quit or anything like that. But the fourth quarter of that last Michigan game was the worst quarter of football Ohio State's played in probably 25 years. So you think about that takes in a lot of real estate. So maybe having guys where it means more to them on the front end will give you better results on the back end. But I'm open to suggestion on that. I mean, if you have Marvin Harrison, I don't care if he's from Mars.
Right. Well, and the point that I was going to make is that, okay, I can make the argument that national recruiting may take away a little bit from that, but we're not. I mean, national recruiting is not anything new at this point. And we look at these guys, and while we're still calling them amateurs, they're pros. I mean, at the height of your game, you're still a pro, NIL, et cetera, et cetera. When you get drafted by the Chicago Bears and you're from Arizona, you're going to realize really quickly that when you're playing the Packers, that means something. That's a rivalry there. So I don't know if you necessarily have to grow up with a rivalry, have geography on your side for a rivalry. If that's what draws it out of you, I just think it's a matter of education and just being around people who understand it and being a student of the game itself. So I don't know if I'm going to sit there and say that, player A out of Arizona or player B out of South Florida or player C out of Washington State doesn't understand the rivalry or doesn't give that, that extra 10% to get to 110% in a rivalry game. I just think it's kind of the case of what it is. I think that we're going to see, I don't know if we're going to see as many rivalries that are true legitimate rivalries. I'm not going to say Georgia Tech. I don't consider that a rivalry. There's such a huge chasm between where those programs are and will probably always be in terms of football. I don't know if we're going to see a lot of prolonged runs the way that Ohio State had it over Michigan. I don't think we're going to see in the Iron Bowl on the regular Alabama win 10 of 11 against Auburn or whatever. I don't know if we're going to see that in some of these rivalry games, because I think that just based on the nature of where college football has gone and NIL dollars and the portal and everything else, we keep coming back to that. But it's true that we're going to see teams a little bit closer, and it's going to come down to some other points, be it coaching or whatever, that's going to determine a lot of these things. And truthfully speaking, as we know in football, there's a luck element that's involved. There's, whether or not it's a ball bounces your right way, or you're the Kansas City Chiefs and you get a defensive holding call going your way in the final minute of the game. I mean, there's a luck component in there too. So I don't know if I'm going to say that national recruiting is necessarily diminishing the rivalries. But I'm also not going to put my heels down and say nothing would change my mind on it. But that's just my feeling on it right now.
I can't disagree with any of that from either one of you, but you guys will probably know this statement a little bit more precisely than I remember it. But didn't Jim Tressel make a statement one time about Ohio born and bred players just giving a little bit more in the fourth quarter when things get tough, or maybe on the practice field in the middle of August? Or he just made some kind of statement about his, I don't know if it was his preference, but in terms of wanting to have a strong element of Ohio players on the roster.
It's a hell of a recruiting pitch, and it certainly is going to get the home base happy. And, we're also talking about, it's funny to think the Jim Tressel era was a different era of football than what we're in right now. And, there wasn't necessarily the portal in the instance. You had to sit out a year. You had to get it cleared and everything else. NIL back in that day were just McDonald's bags filled with $100 bills and things like that. I'm not saying that happened at Ohio State. I'm just saying you didn't have this full mechanism in place that's there today. And let's not forget that Jim Tressel's recruiting was largely Ohio-centric, as we know, put a fence around the state of Ohio, go to Indiana, go to Pennsylvania, go to Florida. That's where he was typically recruiting for the most part. And I know that in the comments, I could get 20, 50, 60 players listed that are like, well, this guy was from Missouri. This guy was from here. I get it. I understand. That's not necessarily the point I'm trying to make. But when you're sitting there and you're trying to right the wrongs of where the rivalry had gone with your predecessor, all of those comments are welcome. And whatever the factual basis is on it, that's up for debate.
Yeah, Tressel, I think he had this notion that Ohio was king and that there's no better place for football than Ohio. And he did sign about half of his guys from Ohio, but Ohio also produced a ton of talent. I mean, in his time, and I don't want to say it's diminished a bit in recent years, but yeah, I think if you did any kind of a case study on it, NFL players or All-Americans or however you want to look at it, 5 stars, 4 stars, whatever, you won't find that many Ohio guys in the last decade that light up those lists. So some of it is bias, I think. The industry seems to be based in Nashville, Tennessee, which is in the heart of SEC country, and I think there is a bias. I think for some of the analysts who operate out of there and see that, but there's also built-in advantages of playing high school football in Florida too. I mean, they have spring football. They do other things. And that's been kind of a debate in Ohio if they should ever go to that. It seems like the baseball and the track coaches, their lobby has won out every time that's come up. And a lot of unintended circumstances that kind of come with that. I mean, if you add spring football in Ohio, you've got to pay people to run it. I mean, you've got to pay the coaches.
Coaches don't want to sit there and add that to their thing and not be compensated.
And not get paid. Yeah, an extra 10 or 15 days of work for these high school teachers. Their time is precious as well. So, there's this romantic notion, they're just going to coach for the good of the game. Well, they're trying to put their kids through college just same as everybody else. I mean, every dime counts to them just as much as it does to anybody else. So I think it's an issue whose time has come to be discussed. I don't really think we need to have guys out there butting heads in full pads in April, but some limited activities. I don't have an issue with it. Maybe 10, 12 days, something like that. I don't know what I'm open.
And one other point I want to make about in-state recruiting too is not only, and I know I've said it on this show and multiple shows before, you're still going to have your top 5, top 6, top 7 kids from Ohio that are going to be recruited by just about everybody. I think where talent has changed, though, it's what is 8 through 25. And I think 8 through 25 within the state today is a little bit different than what 8 through 25 was during Jim Tressel's era. And you were able to fill the roster and recruit and land 13 of the top 15 kids of the state of Ohio. But I think also you saw with Jim Tressel, a lot of teams that were built to win the Big Ten that necessarily were not in the best position to win the national championship in some of those situations. And the other point I wanted to make too is we've seen a lot of changes in terms of where the talent is coming from in the state of Ohio. It used to be Cleveland, Cincinnati, and there was the really sparse in Central Ohio. Well, Cleveland's been dry for a couple years now. Columbus, the greater Central Ohio area has been very strong. And then Cincinnati, certainly Winton Woods, some places like that, Lakota West, they've had guys. We're seeing Ohio get a little bit stronger. Now, Glenville suddenly has guys again. Now, Ohio State gets Arvell Reese in this most recent class of 23. I would expect Ohio State to land Bryce West. Yeah. And then the jumbo athlete, Witten. Can't remember his first name off the top of my head.
Jamarian, is that it?
Jamarian Witten. So I think that you're going to see Ohio State be able to recruit a little bit more in the state Because the truth is, there have to be the kids worthy of recruiting in terms of what their athletic prowess is, and that they're going to be able to contribute and play. It's all well and good to sit there and say, I'm waving the banner for the state of Ohio. And if none of these guys pan out, guess what? You're going to be waving a banner over there in front of Cricket Wireless, spinning one of those big arrows, because you're going to be out of work.
I just posted the number of NFL players by state for the 2022 NFL season. I was a bit pleasantly surprised to see Ohio that prominent at number 5, but to Steve's point, we could see that dwindling a little bit more here in the next few years, with obviously many of those players, who knows, they've got 7, 8, 10 years in the NFL. And so this isn't any kind of recent count, but again, it is recent to the NFL and the players produced by each state.
Yeah, that's interesting to say the least.
Pennsylvania falling. The Pennsylvania used to be much higher.
Yeah. California, to me, I would have thought would have been higher, just because the population out there is so huge. But Texas, Florida, Georgia.
California isn't as much of a football state as we'd like to believe it is. The population certainly does play a factor in there, but Texas, I've watched Friday Night Lights. I've
the culture.
Red Junction Boys. I mean, I get it. Florida is Florida as well, but California is not as football crazy as you would think. But it's always been Texas, Florida, California have been your top 3 producers of collegiate talent for sure. And then where does that go there? But when you sit there and you put it like on a per capita basis, you get states like Louisiana, 71 kids right there, and a much smaller population. So you have a much higher per capita rate, which is what a lot of people are getting kind of fixated on right now.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I'm going to have to do a case study on this. This is very, very interesting stuff.
And I think we mentioned it a few weeks ago. Alabama is definitely on the rise as a state playing high school football, producing 4- and 5-star talent. All right, folks. Kevin had mentioned to me that he's probably going to be talking for like 4 hours today. So we were glad to get 60 minutes out of him here. Kevin, what else do you have going on?
Yeah, I've moved the Big Me podcast from whenever the hell I feel like it to we're going 5 days a week now. So I haven't recorded my one for today, but I'll be turning that here later this afternoon. You can catch me live Tuesdays and Thursdays, generally around 11 o'clock, unless it interferes with something like this show, and I'll move around. And there go our sirens. It must be Wednesday in Ohio right now at this point. And hope everybody can join me over there at the Big Me Kickoff. And you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_noon.
Steve, what do you got?
Well, I'm actually enjoying a little bit of R&R this week in beautiful Hilton Head, South Carolina, but headed back to Ohio before we know it. And we'll be back on the beat for the last few weeks of this basketball season and the beginning of spring football coming up in early March. And looking forward to all that. Hoping to get out to the NFL Combine in a couple of weeks as well. I'll ask my friend Kevin, have you heard anything from the NFL yet?
I have not. A couple of days ago, I went into the credential portal and it was still listed as pending, but I did not find that as an issue because sometimes they don't let you know until 3 days before the event. So it's
2 weeks out right now. The obviously the people who are coordinating that are coming off a fairly large event that they just were involved in, and I was flying down here on Sunday, so I'm watching the game in the airport, on my laptop, and it's timing out. And what I got to see most of was the Rihanna thing at halftime, but I didn't see the penalty at the end until the next day, in fact. And I was kind of like, wow, that's they determined the championship of the sport on that, although the player involved did admit that he grabbed the jersey. So, tough one. I mean, as soon as that penalty hit, I'm like, that's the game, because Philly was out of timeouts, and that allowed Kansas City to will it all the way down. But unfortunate that it was decided like that.
Yeah, it's disappointing when you want to see.
It was absolutely a penalty.
Yeah, I would probably agree.
Yeah, that was my thought. I thought, hey, that ref had every right to throw that penalty. He was technically correct. some of us would like to kind of see
You got
one
to
of
play it
these
out to the
deals
end.
and be
Harry
like,
Porter
oh,
had the wherewithal to throw the flag when it mattered most and when it was an obvious penalty. So I don't need to hear it from anybody coming out of Buckeye Nation about flags in the most pivotal moments. I mean, a penalty in the 59th minute is, it should be adjudicated the same way as a penalty in the first minute. And a lot of people are like, well, they weren't calling that all game. I'm like, well, while you were watching it live, I doubt you were fixating on that. So, just a lot of bluster. But what was that? 113 million people watched the Super Bowl. It was the highest rated Super Bowl in the last six years, and was the third most watched television program ever. I mean,
Wow.
NFL is king. Is what I'm hearing there. And while the Rihanna halftime show was good, and we all got to talk about her being pregnant, which was her big coming out about being pregnant, I don't think that 113 million was fixated around Rihanna's halftime show. It's all about the National Football League.
They put a pregnant woman 40 feet up in the air on like a flimsy platform. That seemed kind of interesting. I'll
have a word.
I'll give their stadium a lot of credit. The rafters are much better than the field. We've lived this thing on the field. The college and professional football industry needs to tell the Arizona Cardinals and State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona, it's time for field turf, because the grass experiment there has never worked. And I think some of it may have been that they painted logos all over the goddamn field. It was just... That was ridiculous too, but guys were slipping all over the place.
$800,000 down the toilet. You know what? It is what it is.
Yeah. Oh, well.
Yeah, the Super Bowl continues to dominate. The NFL continues to dominate. It's crazy how every other sport has lost TV ratings points. College football, not to a large degree, but everybody else. But the NFL just continues to just crank out. Even the conference championship games were in the 53 million range. So speaking of which, we wouldn't mind if Kevin's podcast would be the number one podcast, as long as we're number two, or just so we're in the top two spots. We left the link there in the chat so you can follow it to Kevin's latest edition, even though there's a new one coming out here in the next day or so. So check those out.
It's going to be in the next hour or two, or there's going to be hell to pay for me. So
okay.
As soon as I'm done with this, we're taking the puppy outside. We're coming back here, and we're recording something. I don't know what, but we're recording.
Good luck with all that.
All right, everyone. Check out Kevin's Wildcard podcast from today. Should be good. All right, guys, appreciate you doing this, making this happen each and every week. And hopefully we will get together again next week, typically Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. But that's why you subscribe and hit the bell for the notifications, everyone, to know when we are getting together for Buckeyes Live. See you next week, everyone.
Take care.
See you.